Hey everyone, welcome back to a midweek. We've taken 2 weeks off. The 1 week we had done testimony, so there wasn't necessarily a message to follow up on. And then last week I was sick and I was out, and so it's good to be back. It's good to resume these conversations about the sermon and just kind of not rehash the sermon, but talk about some follow-up points and dive into the reading for the week. And so if you missed the reading for this week, if you happen to miss the message on Sunday, we are reading Exodus 24, Leviticus 16, Isaiah 53 and 54, and then Hebrews 9. And just looking at this kind of the foreshadowing of Jesus as atonement and the sprinkling of the blood in the new covenant, and that, it's foreshadowed and established in the old covenant in Exodus and Leviticus. It's prophesied to be really about Jesus in Isaiah 53 and 54, and then you see it fulfilled in Hebrews 9. So really just a beautiful biblical narrative arc of just the incredible nature of the blood of Christ and that covenant and what all goes into that and what it means for us. So why don't you kick us off? Any thoughts on the message or Exodus 24, and we'll dive in.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you preached on 2 verses. We got a lot out of 2 verses. But I think, the idea of sovereignty and the distinction you made between the moral, God's what was it?
His sovereign will and his moral will.
That's what it is, his sovereign will and his moral will. And I just think that the distinction was really important because, I think in other religions, like with other gods and stuff, they're sovereign in the sense of they believe that this false god is over all things and controlling all things, but they are far off. They're sovereign from afar. And they're not really
it's like a deism, a distant God.
So I think one of the points you made, not in the sermon, but when we were talking about it the other day, you noticed this distinction from Exodus and Hebrews about God's nearness, of how he was once far off. This, the covenant was kind of only Aaron can go into the Holy of Holies. And then, we could talk about that distinction that you found. I just thought it was helpful in understanding sovereignty and helping us understand that, when we say that God is sovereign, it doesn't mean that God is far.
He is removed.
Yeah,
and actually, so one point that wasn't part of the sermon, kind of hinted at and touched on, I don't think I ignored it, but we didn't really unpack it a whole lot, but with God's sovereign will and his moral will, it's not a balanced scale. You know what I mean? Where it's if God's sovereign will is being exercised, then his moral will is decreased. God is always perfectly exercising his sovereign will and his moral will. They always perfectly coexist. It's not a trading balance of one or the other. So I think that's a very important point to make, that they are always in perfect harmony and coexistence, his sovereign will and his moral will. And then, to that point about when you consider, the nearness of God and you start to look in Exodus and Leviticus and stuff. So I love the detail in Exodus 24. In the very second verse, Exodus 24, verse 2, it says, Moses alone shall come near to the Lord. And so you see, Moses alone has this access to God. And then you jump forward to Leviticus 16 and, oh my goodness, I turned right there. Literally, that was perfect. Right? So it says, Leviticus 16 in verse 2 again, and the Lord said to Moses, tell Aaron your brother not to come at any time into the holy place inside the ark before the mercy seat, so that he may not die. And so in Exodus and in Leviticus, as you see these covenants established and this idea of atonement and the mercy seat and blood, making atonement for the sins of the people, you see, Moses is the only one who gets to come near to God. Aaron's the only one who gets to come before the mercy seat, and only then at very specific times, not whenever he chooses. But then you get to the New Testament, right? And you've got this beautiful juxtaposition of language. Because in the Old Testament, we read, Moses alone shall come near the Lord. Moses alone shall come before the Lord, right? And then you get to the New Testament and you see the language of, let us draw near to the Lord. And in Leviticus, you see, Aaron shall not come at any time before the mercy seat. But then in the New Testament, you see, we get to go before the mercy seat at any time. Like whenever we choose to pray,
Yep.
we get to. And so it's just this incredible
Yep.
completion and perfection in establishing in the new covenant.
Yeah.
Where it takes these elements of the old covenant, and then Jesus is the better version of them.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's just really neat to see how that plays out, even in the language and the structure from the old to the new.
I thought when you said that, I was like, I didn't catch that when I was reading it, but man, that's a good thread.
Yeah.
through
So
that.
it's cool. And it's cool to see how God's sovereignty is not diminished in either of those. You know what I mean? Like God's sovereignty was in full effect when it was Moses who came near. God's sovereignty is in full effect when it's us who draw near. And so it's neat to see that relationship that he has always desired with his people and that personal knowing and being known by. And I think that's really something to treasure and to cherish, especially in light of a covenant.
Oh, yeah.
You know, when you think of a covenant, it's two parties entering into a covenant together. And so this idea like, man, God desires to enter into a covenant with me through Jesus.
Yeah.
And Jesus was willing to pay with his blood to make that covenant possible. Like that's incredible.
Yeah, I think, I when you said that, it just kind of, for some reason, it just had a click in my mind of, that makes sense. Like, through Jesus, we can draw near. Like, I think of the verse, I can't remember where it's at, but it says, like, God will draw near as you draw near to him. I can't remember where that's at, but it's probably on the screen now somewhere. But that's just the nearness of God, even in his ability to govern and reign over all things, even the bad things. So, but
so I think those are important points to make about his sovereignty and the perfect coexistence, how it's foreshadowed in Exodus and Leviticus. I think also as you're reading through Exodus 24, you again just see that reminder of the sprinkling of the blood as the people both receiving the reward, like the benefits of the covenant, but also making that promise of obedience to God. And so I think we can't overlook that. Then you get to Leviticus 16, and I think one of the things that really stands out to me, not only the detail of Aaron, like we already talked about, but even just like, hopefully as people are reading through Leviticus 16, hopefully as you're watching this, and if you've already read through Leviticus 16 or not yet, go back and reread it maybe. Pay attention to how much detail goes into this, like how meticulous of a process it was with so many different steps and so many, you know what I mean? Like it was such this elaborate thing. And then consider the fact that they had to do this over and over and over and over and over again. Right? And then it's like, okay, Jesus did all of that perfectly. You know what I mean? Like, imagine if we still had to go through that huge process
every year,
like constantly for atonement and forgiveness. And then to just think that Jesus has perfected this and has done this in totality. One of the verses that we actually talked about in men's Bible study on Tuesday night, a verse that I'll be referencing in this upcoming sermon, because I think it's just such a perfect verse that we need to memorize and know and internalize. But where it talks about in Hebrews 7, and it says he is able to save to the uttermost those who come to him because he lives to permanently, perpetually intercede on our behalf.
That's one of the most amazing verses.
Crazy, right? So all of Leviticus 16 is now beautifully encapsulated in Jesus permanently living to intercede on our behalf. Like it's incredible.
It's breathtaking. I mean, it's literally mind-blowing.
But I love how Exodus and Leviticus flow together, and you see the blood, and you see that God has always provided a means of atonement. So I think you see God's mercy and goodness in that. I mean, like it wasn't like before Jesus, God wasn't forgiving. God from the beginning has been like, I want my people to be able to make atonement. Like I want there to be atonement for the sins of my people. And so I love even that, just that glimpse of God's character that you get in studying these.
I mean, it's so helpful. Hopefully you guys catch a lot of that when you're reading. I mean, it's Leviticus. I mean, I think Christians are always like, oh, Leviticus, which is hard to read. But then when you start to see stuff like that, it's like, oh, so this isn't a New Testament thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
and that was my hope and deliberately picking, two passages from the Pentateuch, from the Torah, right? Like the first 5 books where you've got Genesis, a lot of cool stories, okay? Exodus, still some really cool stories. Oh, now we're starting to get into a lot of details. Leviticus, Deuteronomy. It's like, no, those first 5 books are beautiful for what's in there. And so hopefully people are getting excited reading through and seeing the arc.
Yeah.
Because you start with the Torah, you start with the Pentateuch, with the beginning, and then you come to the prophets, and you come to Isaiah, and you see, you see Isaiah 53, this famous chapter about Jesus that gets quoted all the time. But I feel like we kind of spend a lot of time on the same 3 or 4 verses in Isaiah 53.
Yeah.
And so I was like, no, let's read all of Isaiah 53, because in Isaiah 53, right, you see this is about the coming Messiah. This is he was pierced for our transgressions. This is who is coming to fulfill the new covenant. And then it flows beautifully right into Isaiah 54 that now talks about this eternal covenant of peace.
Yep.
And so it's just such a beautiful bridge between Exodus and Leviticus and what we're going to get to in Hebrews 9. So I really love Isaiah 53 and 54 together for that.
Yeah, I think I can't remember how you said it, but something like if you printed out those chapters in one just continuous flow, you would never even know there was 2 chapters.
No.
They flowed that well together. So I think that's good because it's the same thought, the same promise, same everything that's tied to Jesus and the coming Messiah, which is then just realized in Hebrews 9, which to me, I read it once in the ESV, once in the NIV, and then again, I was reading it again in the ESV because it's just such a beautiful, if you need to be reminded of the finished work and be reminded that it is finished, I think Hebrews 9 is just such a it's powerful.
It's the fulfillment of everything you see in Isaiah 53 and 54, right? Like in Isaiah 53 and 54, you've got he has borne our griefs, he has carried our sorrows, we esteemed him stricken, he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace. And by his wounds, we are healed. And so it's prophesied in Isaiah 53. Then you come to Isaiah 54 and it says, for your maker is your husband, the Lord of hosts is his name, the Holy One of Israel is your Redeemer. And God of the whole earth he is called. With great compassion I will gather you. I hid my face from you for a moment, but with everlasting love I will have compassion on you. The mountains may depart, the hills may be removed, but my steadfast love shall not depart from you. My covenant of peace shall not be removed. So you've got these incredible, right? We're talking about the grief and the anguish of what Jesus went through, but then you also see his chastisement brought us peace. His wounds brought us healing. God redeemed us. And then you jump forward to Hebrews, like you're saying, and you've got just these beautiful, right? For if the blood of goats and bulls and the sprinkling of defiled persons with the ashes of a heifer sanctify for the purification of the flesh, how much more will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without blemish to God, purify our conscience? And then it was necessary for heavenly copies to be purified with these rites, but heavenly things with better sacrifices than these. It's just this, it's incredible. It's, the chastisement and the peace that you read about in Isaiah is completed. The eternalness of the completion.
Man.
In Hebrews, it's unbelievable, right? And again, a death has occurred. Now I'm in verse 15. He's the mediator of a new covenant, so that those who are called may receive the promised eternal inheritance. Since a death has occurred that redeems them from the transgressions committed under the first covenant. That's Isaiah 53 and 54.
Man,
that's Exodus. That's Leviticus, and so it's just the way they all flow together and build this narrative is incredible.
It really is. And honestly, there's not much to say about it, because just like that verse in 1 John that you talked about, he's able to save to the utmost those. And I just think Hebrews 9 is well, this is why. This is why he's the great high priest, eternal high priest, once and for all paid for sins. He is I can't remember what he said, something about shadows and Anyways,
Yeah.
it's just good. If you haven't
just,
read it,
it's incredible.
read it and then read it again.
Yep.
Because it's good. Now, I did have a question based on the sermon and in light of all of these about the sanctifying work of the Holy Spirit.
Okay.
So I think in your sermon you mentioned how, like suffering produces, God is working all things according to his good purposes with the sovereignty, his moral and sovereign will. He's using these things to sanctify us and to make us more holy, to conform us into the image of his son. So I guess a follow-up question that maybe some people are asking, I had the question in my own mind, what does that look like? What does that sanctifying work look like? Does it mean like reading more? Does it mean like knowing more knowledge? Or is it,
So what does sanctification look like practically?
Practically.
I would describe sanctification, right? If sanctification is being conformed to the image and the person and the character of Christ, right? That's that's the definition I use for sanctification, being conformed to the image, person, and character of Christ and behavior of Christ.
Yeah.
Then practically, sanctification will look like living more like Jesus and looking more like Jesus and responding more like Jesus. And also, if sanctification is a ministry of the Holy Spirit, what's one of the most famous pieces of Galatians 5, the fruit of the Spirit, right?
Yep.
And so what will sanctification look like practically? It will look like a believer growing in their model of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. It will look like someone facing a horrible situation and being able to respond in a spirit of peace and gentleness. I'm fond of pointing out that happiness is an emotion, joy is a spirit.
Yeah.
So the fruit of the Spirit is not happiness. The fruit of the Spirit is joy.
Yeah.
We may be in a situation that is emotionally troubling, but we can still have a spirit of joy knowing that God has not changed within it. We may be in a situation that is troubling, but we can respond in the spirit of peace because we are practically growing in our sanctification. And so look at the words that we use. Look at how we respond to things. Look at how we respond to people. Look at how we treat people. I'm snapping at you because I'm just in a stressful situation. Right? Okay, well, no, the fruit of the Spirit is gentleness and self-control.
Yeah.
So if I say things like, well, when I get stressed, I can't control what I say.
Yeah.
Okay, then you need to ask yourself, am I submitting to practical sanctification? You know what I mean? So I think practically the fruit of the Spirit is a great checklist of, okay, regardless of the situation, am I still someone of love, of peace, of patience, of kindness, of goodness, of faithfulness? Or does my behavior, is it operate on a whim based on my external situation?
Yeah, does it fluctuate based on certain, that's a good gauge of understanding. Because then you'll know, I guess you'd be able to kind of look at if these things truly are rooted in your heart and actually are becoming your character rather than just, I know that verse.
Yeah, it's not about just knowing it, right? I could recite the fruit of the Spirit, but if there's no application, if there's no evidence of it in my life, who cares that I can recite it? You know what I mean? And so it's got to go beyond that just, I intellectually know this, to, okay, I have intellectually processed this and know this, and I know it in my heart, and I pursue it, and I live it out because I'm surrendered to the Spirit.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, I just thought that'd be a great
follow-up. I think that's a great question. What does sanctification practically look like in our suffering? And I think a lot of times as we live out in sanctification in suffering, you talk about how many times has our church talked about pray for open doors, and Paul in his letters writes about open doors and things like that. I think a lot of times when we respond in sanctification to suffering and trials, that opens doors to declare the gospel.
Wow.
Just a personal example, and I've shared this before, but when Violet was 3 days old, just born, 3 days old, temperature's dropping. We don't know why. Doctors don't know why. Her veins keep collapsing, so they can't do blood draw, right? Huge stressful situation. Our newborn daughter is in medical danger.
Yeah.
We're in the ER, right? And Adeline and I are able to respond in a peaceful way. And we had doctors and nurses asking us okay, why are you responding with peace right now? Why are you at peace right now? We're able to talk about Jesus.
Man.
And so I think it's stuff like that.
That's good. Yeah, I think that's great.
Yeah.
I think that's good.
That's all I got.
That's all I got.
All right.
Read Hebrews 9, read all the things.
Read
it
those
all.
chapters. Let us know what you think, and we'll see you all Sunday.
See ya.
Hey everyone, Pastor Sam here. Thanks for joining us for another midweek Bible study video. If you didn't see the sermon that we were talking about, you can find it here. Or if you're interested in more of these midweek Bible study videos and thoughts as Pastor Mario and I break things down, you can find that here as well. Make sure you like and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date on all our content. Thanks for joining us.